Ladies and gentlemen, I don't have to explain this video. This video will explain itself. Let's get into some of this straight game.
Blackjack. Life is like the cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's your boy Delray Richardson, platinum artist, platinum songwriter, Straight Game TV. Do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button. Also subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And like I always say, if you want to be one of the first people notified when I drop some of this straight game, please do me a favor and click on what appears to be that little bell notification right below this video. I'm going to get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take you to the MGM Grand for 2 occasions. And I'm going to show you how Reggie the Wright Jr. lied, how he tried to create a narrative of the hate that Tupac allegedly had for Frank Alexander. And I'm going to show you how he lied about what he said he knew and didn't know at the time, trying to cover up both ends. Reggie the Wright Jr. Is a scoundrel, man. He's a scoundrel. I'm going to get right into it like this. Look, lady, and pay attention. You got to follow me on this because I'm going to show you, when somebody lies and just lies on both sides of aisle and plays all sides of the fence. Look at this. This shit is egregious. Watch this. So look. So, okay. So now, we're in Vegas. This is earlier in the evening, in where Tupac went from the Luxor over to the MGM to gamble, right? And this is Frank Alexander talking and explaining the environment, if you will. Better place for a high-rolling gangster to be seen rolling high. That was in Vegas at a craps table. I started tensing up because everyone was looking to get in his face, meaning Tupac's face, all of the fans and people seeing him gambling. Michael Moore had walked with us from the Luxor, and he had Pac flanked on one side, and I had the other side. The outlaws were staggered throughout the crowd, spreading out so people wouldn't know who they were, right? So this is earlier in the evening, before the fight, before Suge and anybody's around, anything like that. You see Frank Alexander described that Michael Moore had walked over to the MGM Grand with them from the Luxor, right? And Michael Moore had Tupac flanked on one side, and Frank Alexander had him flanked on the other, right? And so the conversation goes on. This is Frank still speaking. In his space, and it was getting close to fight time, right? I needed a phone to check in with Reggie in case Suge was looking for him, looking for Tupac. He always wanted to know where at all times Tupac was. Understood? Frank Alexander then says, the fucked up thing was I didn't have my security staff MO cell phone. While I was on vacation, Kevin Hackey used it, and since he and Reggie were fighting, I didn't have it on me because Kevin wasn't coming to Vegas. Remember Frank Alexander, what he's saying. He didn't have his radio because Kevin Hackey used it when he was on vacation. Him and Reggie were fighting. He said, I didn't have it on me because Kevin wasn't coming to Vegas. I couldn't believe I'm rolling with Death Row's $1 Million Boy, meaning Tupac, one of the biggest rap stars in the world, and I got to use a payphone. I must have left him for about a minute, long enough to leave Reggie a message from a public phone a couple of feet away before making my way back to the table Tupac wasn't there. Mind you, Michael Moore was with Tupac when Frank walked away, and Tupac eventually walked back over to the Luxor from the MGM Grand. They say Tupac had won money, and he walked back over to the Luxor from the MGM Grand. So Tupac wasn't alone. Now, the environment wasn't Tupac was trying to shake Frank, get rid of Frank. Tupac was just done and impulsively like, yo, come on, y'all, let's go back over to the what's name. Now, Tupac wasn't alarmed because he had Michael Moore with him. Now, if Tupac probably didn't have Michael Moore with him, he probably would have looked around and been like, yo, where Frank at or whatever. But Tupac felt confident because Michael Moore, remember, had his firearm on him. Remember, Kevin Hackey is not coming to Vegas. I'm going to show you something, ladies and gentlemen. This is like I said, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. is a snake. So look at this. Watch this. So now, this is Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. in an interview, and him laying out what he lays out. And I want you to understand now, this right here, you got to understand the time of evening, right? Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. saying this: Frank didn't call me and tell me Kevin Hackey didn't show up yet or that they had left. Remember, it's not Frank Alexander's job to let Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., who was the head of security, know that Kevin Hackey didn't show up. That would be Reggie the Rat Wright Jr.'s job and Kevin Hackey to communicate with each other as employee and supervisor or owner to employee. But once again, Reggie tries to push it out on Frank because Frank didn't let me know. Check it out now. They went to the fight in a cab. Now, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. wouldn't have known this if Frank wouldn't have told this story because Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. wasn't there. This is after Frank tells the story that Reggie then formulates his story around the truth and the facts that Frank Alexander is telling about what happened during the night. Now, mind you, this is the time when the time to go to the fight. Remember earlier they were at the MGM, walked over from the Luxor to the MGM, and Michael Moore was there. So this is for Reggie telling the story. They went to the fight in a cab. He says this, listen very carefully. We didn't even know that until later on, until Suge got to the fight. That's when we learned he, Tupac, only had one bodyguard, but by that time, the incident had happened. Look at that statement, right? He's saying that it wasn't until later on that Suge got to the fight. That's when until Suge got to the fight, right? The situation happened after the fight. So if he's learning when Suge got to the fight, he's saying that's the time that he learned when Suge got to the fight, not after the fight. The situation, the fight happened with Orlando after the fight. So if he's learning that when Suge got to the fight, and then he goes on to explain, so he speeds up time, that's when we learn he only had one bodyguard, but by that time, the incident had happened. That's a lie. He said it wasn't until Suge got to the fight. The situation didn't happen till after the fight. What that tells you is when Suge saying, yo, they asked for more security. But we're not going to focus on that, right? Listen. But at no point when they were at Suge's house, they were there and other people had walkie-talkies and everything. Frank had never called and informed us that he had the incident at the hotel, nor did he ever inform me that he was the only bodyguard with Tupac. Pause. He's saying that Frank never informed him that he was the only bodyguard with Tupac. Ladies and gentlemen, let me show you something. Because Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. has told so many stories, he may have forgotten about this one that he's going to tell next in saying that Frank never informed him. But maybe Tupac informed him that Frank was the only bodyguard on him. How about that? You think Tupac called him and told him that? According to Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., that's what happened. Check it out. This is a question from all hip hop, right? And Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. is so gung ho in trying to disrespect Frank Alexander for telling his truth that Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. slips up and mentions something that didn't happen, but trying to make himself appear more closer and in kind with Tupac. He lies and he slips up. Watch this. Another thing was that the question from all hip hop. Another thing that was presented in the movie was that the use of the walkie-talkies, which was pretty much standard for your staff at the time, were not available to Frank Alexander. Now, Frank already explained why he didn't have the walkie-talkie. He explained that Kevin Hackey wasn't coming to Vegas. Kevin Hackey and Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. were arguing, right? Listen to what Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. says, though. Reginald Wright. Frank had been on vacation the week prior, and Frank had already told that story. This is where Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. gets his narrative from. The thing is, Pac hated Frank. Now, they didn't ask Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. what was Tupac and Frank's relationship. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. takes and tries to infuse this into the answer to the question, but look what he does. That's why he shook Frank at the casino. Ladies and gentlemen, if Frank Alexander didn't tell the story about how he lost Tupac at the casino, how would Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. know that Tupac shook Frank or allegedly shook Frank? Because Tupac didn't talk to Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. after that incident because Tupac was shot in the hospital. So how, if Frank didn't tell the story about him losing Tupac when he went to make the phone call to call Reggie, then how is it that Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. would be able to tell this story? That's why he shook Frank at the casino? That's not what happened. Tupac went back to the Luxor with Michael Moore. But listen to the lie that Reggie tells when, remember, he said earlier that it wasn't until Suge got to the fight, that was the time that he learned that Frank was the only security guard on Tupac, right? But here, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. says, when Tupac allegedly shook Frank, Pac called him. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. now is going to put himself on a phone call with Tupac. Pac called and said, Reggie, why the fuck? I told you I don't want this dude with me no more. I told you the one I want is Hackey. I told him all the other guys were at the club. Not that Hackey wasn't coming to Vegas. Not that Hackey's on his way. He said, I told him all the other guys were at the club. This is a lie, ladies and gentlemen, but this is Reggie trying to formulate this narrative, right? Remember, he had already told that other story about wasn't until Suge came to the fight. See, when you can't keep your stories together, hold on. He said that Tupac didn't care. He really liked Kevin. I can't say he didn't like Kevin. He liked dealing with Kevin and all of that, right? The key point here is Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. is alleging that Tupac shook Frank at the casino. We know that that didn't happen, right? Because Tupac went back to the Luxor with Michael Moore, who had his firearm on him, right? But Reggie told this egregious ass lie that Tupac called him and said, Reggie, why the fuck? So if Tupac called Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. allegedly, which we know he didn't do, and told him and asked him why the fuck that he had Frank on him, then Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. already knew earlier in the evening, if Tupac called him, he knew before Suge showed up to the fight that Frank Alexander was the only security guard on Tupac. Now, wasn't he? Didn't he know that? Hold on, let's go back. Look. And didn't he say that? He said it wasn't until Suge got to the fight. That's when we learned he only had one bodyguard on him. That's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie in Tupac's alleged name, because right here he said what? When Tupac shook Frank, Pac called and said, Reggie, why the fuck I told you I don't want this dude on with me no more. That means that Reggie already knew that Frank Alexander would have been the only security guard on Tupac, because then it goes on, because Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. then tells another lie on top of that. I told him all the other guys are at the club. He didn't tell him that Kevin Hackey was on his way, right? Because Frank Alexander had already told the truth about that. What did Frank say? Frank said that what? What did Frank say? Frank told us what? Frank said, while I was on vacation, Kevin used his phone, and since he and Reggie were fighting, I didn't have it on me because Kevin wasn't coming to Vegas. Amazing. So, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. Wow. So Tupac called him and asked him why the fuck did he have Frank Alexander on him when Reggie lied earlier and said that he didn't tell. He didn't know. What did he didn't know? He didn't know. We didn't even know until later on, until Suge got to the fight. That's when we learned he only had one bodyguard. But by that time, the incident had happened. No, it didn't. Because when Suge got to the fight, the incident happened after the fight. You see how Reggie trying to cover his ass? He's been doing it since the beginning, ladies and gentlemen. You see the lie. And not only that, he lied and used Tupac's name and said Pac called him. Damn. Well, if Pac called him, then what? He knew. Right? So he got himself caught up in a lie and trying to ingratiate or appear to ingratiate himself with Tupac as if Tupac was fucking with him like that. We know that that's not true based on the fact that just I would say 11 days before Tupac had fired Reggie as his personal security, Tupac didn't call him. This is the reason why he's lying and saying that Tupac called him and asked him why the fuck I told you I didn't want this dude on me. That's the reason why he did it. See, he was doing all of this. See, Reggie knew that he had got the letter firing him. So now this is why he would tell the story right here. Pac called and said, Reggie, why the fuck? No, Tupac didn't. Because if that were true, right, then that would mean that Reggie knew what? Before. He knew way before Suge got to the fight that Frank Alexander was the only one on Tupac, because Tupac allegedly told him. And then he said, oh, but by that time, the incident had happened. No, it didn't. That's a whole nother lie. It happened after the fight. He found out, he said, but we didn't know until Suge got to the fight. How would Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. know that? He wasn't there. Right? Think about that. But by that time, the incident had happened. How would he know that? Ladies and gentlemen, boy, look. Man. This investigation was done sloppily. And I'm going to show you this, because not only that, but Frank Alexander goes into a little bit more about that. And he said, right? And Frank says, Frank goes in. What Frank said? Frank goes in. Frank said, listen, Frank said what? After the meeting, and he goes in to explain the situation between Reggie and Kevin Hackey, right? After the meeting, we caught a ride with Reggie. He took us out to lunch at TGI Fridays, right? We finished eating. Reggie started bitching about Kevin Hackey. Now, this is very important because Reggie's bitching about Kevin Hackey. There's no indication that Kevin Hackey is coming to work or nothing like that, right? This is Frank telling the story. Reggie bitching about Kevin Hackey, the bodyguard who replaced me when I was on vacation. So Reggie is bad-mouthing Kevin Hackey to Frank Alexander. They'd gotten into it over money. Kevin, who had worked with Reggie long before he hooked up with Suge to form Right Way, when they were both policing in the streets of Compton, managed to hook something up with the producers of Gang Related, the movie Pac made in August, right? Think about it. Think about that. This is August. This is around the time that Reggie was fired, right? In August. Kevin Hackey, he got paid $10,000 for offering his technical advice on the shooting scenes. Reggie felt Kevin had undermined his authority by taking the 10 grand and still taking money from Right Way for bodyguarding Pac. In my opinion, Kevin took what he deserved. You get it? Kevin Hackey wasn't supposed to be coming to work. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. knew. And the cold part about it is, remember, Michael Moore was with Tupac and them earlier. You think Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. found out about that? Because he allegedly said he told Tupac all the other guys were at the club. Right? Were they? At that particular time? Listen. Let me take you back now. One more time. He tells Tupac what? Y'all ain't paying attention to me. I'm giving you the straight game, man, like nobody else can give it to you, right? What did Reggie tell Tupac he told Tupac? Reggie said, I told Tupac, I told him all the other guys were at the club. Ladies and gentlemen, you can tell the conversation is a lie. Why? Why can you tell the conversation is a lie? I told him all the other guys were at the club. Why is that a lie? I'm going to take you back to it now. Watch this. Who walked Tupac back over to the Luxor when Frank got lost from him? Michael Moore. Michael Moore wasn't at the club because Michael Moore had just walked Tupac back to the hotel. Mind you, he's saying that Tupac called him in between the time that he alleged that Tupac shook Frank, right? Now, but then he goes in to say what? Frank had been on vacation a week prior. The thing is, Pac hated Frank. That's why he shook Frank at the casino. Who was at the casino with Frank? Had Tupac flanked on the other side. Michael Moore. Pac called and said, Reggie, why the fuck? I told you I don't want this dude with me no more. I told you the one I want is Hackey. And Reggie says he told Tupac on the phone, I told him all the other guys are at the club. That wasn't true. Michael Moore just walked Tupac back to the Luxor. Tupac thinking that Michael Moore is going to be on him for the rest of the evening. Right? Reggie pulled Michael Moore off of him. Tim Williams basically testified to that. Because Tim Williams was Michael Moore's roommate. That is a fact, ladies and gentlemen. So now, you get it? Kevin Hackey wasn't supposed to be coming to Vegas. He wasn't coming to work. Frank explained that. When Tupac allegedly called Reggie and said, yeah, I like Kevin Hackey. I don't like Frank Alexander. Reggie allegedly told Tupac, which was a lie, we know now. Oh, all the other guys at the club. He ain't tell him, well, Kevin on his way. He ain't tell him that because Kevin wasn't supposed to be there. So it's a whole big ass lie, right? Everybody else at the club. Oh, when I found out, we didn't find out that Frank was the only bodyguard on him until Suge got to the fight. That's a lie because he said Tupac called him earlier and told him that Frank was on him. And why Frank on me? I need Kevin Hackey. Oh, but by that time the incident had happened. That's a lie. Because the incident happened after the fight, not before. Get it? Reggie took information that was made available to the public, including Frank Alexander's story, and created his own narrative. When in fact, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. is complicit in the death of Tupac Shakur. It's deeper than what we all think we know, and he's been doing nothing but lying. Your boy Delray, straight gang.